Hola, soy Karen Baeza, un estudiante aquí en el Centro del Critical Study of the Health of Latinx Communities. Y aquí estamos con...
Samuel Orozco, director de Noticias e Información de la red de radio bilingüe, la red latina de la Radio Pública Nacional en Fresno.
Perfecto, gracias. Ok, vamos a continuar. Gracias por su respuesta. Tengo otra pregunta que es como una extensión de mi primera pregunta y es ¿cómo puede ayudar a la comunidad latina en este aspecto de lo que está pasando ahorita?
Bueno, una forma en que tratamos nosotros de echar la mano a los oyentes y a la comunidad en general es a través del, por ejemplo, programas como el que acabo de mencionar,
Sí.
Conozca sus derechos,
Sí.
a través del cual tratamos de traer a abogados especialistas en derecho que entonces le explican a la gente qué hacer en caso de que de repente se encuentre en una situación de posible arresto dentro de su casa, dentro de su carro, dentro de su empleo, en la vía pública o en cualquier otra situación en la que se encuentren, cuáles son sus derechos constitucionales y cuáles son sus derechos legales que puede aplicar, que puede usar en esas circunstancias. O también, como lo ha venido pasando últimamente, que pese a que la gente trata de invocar sus derechos, pues a veces tampoco les sirve, ¿no? Y qué hacer entonces si las cosas, si sus derechos son atropellados, ¿no? En otras palabras, ¿no? Entonces, cómo documentar todo este asunto, cómo convertirse en un verdadero periodista ciudadano, un reportero ciudadano a través del celular, de las videocámaras, etcétera. Cómo documentar todo con el fin de, en su momento, poder defenderse, no poder efectivamente defender los derechos que hayan sido atropellados. Cosas por el estilo es una de las maneras en que tratamos igualmente de apoyar a la comunidad. Otra puede ser también el hecho de que nosotros pues tratamos de hacer un esfuerzo especial para combatir la desinformación, ¿no? O misinformation o disinformation, ¿no?
Sí.
¿No? La falsa información que circula por todas partes, ya sea con relación a las amenazas de redadas, nosotros tratamos de verificar que todo eso de veras esté pasando. Y número dos, en cosas como por ejemplo en el terreno de la salud, lo que últimamente se está mirando mucho es esta desinformación sobre las vacunas, ¿no? El efecto de las vacunas y que ha venido teniendo, lo hemos visto, un efecto disuasorio, ¿no? En nuestras comunidades. Ya no hay, es decir, cada día más hay más gente que se resiste, ¿no? A llevar a sus niños a ser vacunados, lo cual está teniendo consecuencias en algunas de nuestras comunidades en Texas, en Nuevo México y en otros estados, donde ya ves, no tenemos una proliferación de los casos o de brotes de sarampión, ¿no? Sí. Que rebasó la frontera y ahora está por todo México, por cierto, ¿no? Bueno, todo eso requiere, hoy precisamente acabamos de tener un programa especial con al menos 3 distinguidas o distinguidos médicos de todo el estado, de Los Ángeles, de Sacramento, del Departamento de Salud Pública, con el fin de pues aportar la ciencia, ¿no? Sobre las vacunas, ¿no? ¿Qué es lo que dice la ciencia sobre las vacunas en contra de toda esta campaña y estas regulaciones inclusive, ¿no? Cambios de regulaciones o cambios de recomendaciones procedentes de algunas agencias conectadas con el gobierno federal? Entonces, obviamente, es difícil, ¿no? Sí. Es difícil remontar el impacto de opiniones tan poderosas como las que vienen de aquellas agencias, pero entonces nosotros tratamos otra vez, ¿no? De poner a la gente las herramientas de la ciencia con el fin de que puedan defenderse, ¿no? Ante este tipo de situaciones, ¿no? Entonces, combatir la desinformación, misinformation, con relación igualmente al asunto esto del public charge, ¿no? Sí. De ser considerado carga pública, ¿no? Entonces, tratar de pues disipar los falsos rumores que hay, ¿no? Y pues ver lo que dice la ley, ¿no? A través de la ley, entonces que la gente se entere cómo es que sí puede acceder la familia muchas veces a beneficios públicos, tales como el Medicaid, ¿no? Merical, en California, ¿no? Entonces, eso, esas algunas de las formas en que nosotros tratamos de responder, ¿no?, a estas situaciones.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Ok, vamos a continuar con nuestra entrevista y ahora vamos a mover a mis preguntas que están en inglés. Entonces, va. For more than 40 years working in community radio, what moment made you realize that Radio Bilingüe was truly changing people's lives, not just informing them, but empowering them to act?
Well, it's difficult to find one specific moment, but several moments come to my mind, to my memory. One of them was perhaps the time when there was this call, from different organizations, pro-immigrant rights organizations, to resist the impact of this bill in Congress, the Sensenbrenner bill, back in 2006. It was in 2006. Mm-hmm. And there was this call to demonstrate, to resist this particular bill that was basically trying to get people to show their papers, basically what's going on today. Mm-hmm. It was trying to make it a law in those days. So people went out to the streets, and they went out to the streets not by the thousands, but by the hundreds of thousands in many locations, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, in Denver, Dallas. And that day, we went on the air, even though one of those days was called the Day Without Immigrants, right? And so we were invited to not show up to work, right? We decided to show up to work and to be able to tell the story.
Yeah.
So we heard from reporters in many locations in Washington State, in Oregon, California, Denver, El Paso. But we also got calls from listeners. And we learned about events, rallies, marchas, etc., in places that nobody else knew, that they were happening. Castroville and these other locations inside Oregon and in the little towns in Colorado. We were hearing, from people from those little valleys all around, telling us as citizen reporters, what was going on, describing exactly what was going on. So at that moment, I realized about the power of a listener who is not just passively, consuming the information that he or she is getting from us, but he's actually becoming an active participant in the creation of information and also citizen action. So many of these usual listeners became, again, reporters for one day, became our eyes and our ears in the communities. So that's when I realized about that day.
Yeah.
And actually it was more than one day. It was different actions, different moments. Mm-hmm. But in those moments, that's when I realized about how our medium, radio, could actually have an impact out there, a social impact out there. Yeah. And, there are other instances of the moments when, communities like the mothers in McFarland, which is a little town by Delano, they had a case of a cluster of cases of cancer and malformations in congenital defects in children in the area. And so we did an extensive reporting in that area. We did public forums in that area. People became engaged in the conversation. Eventually, some leaders of national influence came to town, and it became a real movement with a tremendous impact in the local area. That's another instance, another case. I remember when the power of media, can make a difference in the life of local communities and local people. And I can say that just by itself, I mean, the fact that we're a community-based organization and we rely on the work and the service of local people, volunteers. You know, in many cases, many of us are paid staffers, but many are volunteers, you know, who show up and give their free time, their spare time for the benefit of the whole community. Well, many of these people, you know, who come from the fields or from the barrios, you know, or homemakers, señoras, become transformed also by the fact that they provide all this service and get in contact with all this information. And I remember one particular case of this compañera, you know, who got engaged in the newsroom. She had never been an activist and very opinionated before, and she became a very recognized activist in the Native American movement in the Central Valley. You know, thanks to the fact again that through community service on Radio Bilingüe, she was transformed. She was empowered and transformed. So that's more internal, but that's again, you know, an example of how people could get transformed and how the practice of journalism or communication could transform people's lives.
It's really inspiring. Wow. I have another question. You often describe Radio Bilingüe as being controlled by the community. In today's digital and social media landscape, what does community-controlled media mean to you now? And how can it remain powerful for Latinx communities?
Mm-hmm. Well, I believe that community media, I mean, any organization or radio organizations that call ourselves community radio stations do so because of three reasons. One, because we are governed by a board of directors that comes from the community. The people who have served as board members on Radio Bilingüe have been volunteers who have some degree of influence in their local communities. And I can say that dozens, if not hundreds, of people have served on the board of directors in these 45 years of the life of Radio Bilingüe. So that's one way that we are connected to the community. The other way is through the volunteer system. The fact that many of the people who become announcers or reporters or who help in fundraising activities, many of those people come from the community on a volunteer basis. So that's the other connection. I mean, the fact that it is operated in many ways by these people who know, you know, about their communities, who have roots in their communities. And three, the fact that even though it is not a huge segment of our budget, but the support, the money that we receive from the listeners is also very important to us. It is very important in the sense that, okay, it provides us more than a symbolic way that how thousands of members of the community decide to help support the operations of Radio Bilingüe. So that's how we describe ourselves, you know, a community-based and a community-run organization. And in these moments, I think it's extremely important because, number one, this character, you know, this nature of being community operated, give us the guarantee of being independent from the influence of the powers, either economic power, corporate power, or the political powers. We're independent. And in these moments when you know, the media is being more and more concentrated in fewer hands. That's very important. The fact that that nature of us being community-based and independent, it is so important to be able to, in a way, continue being the checks and balances for the other media outlets.
Yeah. Wow, that was really cool. I think it's really interesting how you have that that volunteer-based system, and you're able to give more opportunities to the community. If I was a community member, I would really want to be involved in that, because at this point, I think in this day and age, many people believe, or at least in my generation, we believe that we shouldn't have civil duties because we aren't heard. And I think that the system that you have actually shows that yes, you are heard. So that's really, really cool. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
One last question. Many of the issues that you reported on, which could be public health, immigration, or environmental exposure, are still affecting Latinx communities today. From your perspective, what lessons from the early years of Radio Bilingüe should guide how we address these challenges moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can say that much of the core, values that drove the founders of Radio Bilingüe to organize the Radio Bilingüe are still valid today. I think can continue being applied, today. Number one, again, the being an independent organization, being community-based organization.
Yes.
That continues being really relevant today to be able to do what we do. Mm-hmm. Number two, being also a culturally relevant organization. In other palabras, we've been applying from those days for decades a principle, a slogan, let's say, that we heard from a healer over here in San Francisco, by the way. I learned it from this healer. And that's la cultura cura, meaning that, to be able to respond to many of the ills, to many of the problems that we currently face as a people, instead of going out and trying to find the answers in foreign knowledge or Western knowledge or whatever, we just need to look into ourselves, look into the wisdom and knowledge and traditions of our own communities. Just look into what our grandmas and our grandpas used to do. I mean, that's good for chronic disease, for example. I mean, just go back to la cocina de la abuela instead of the ultra-processed food, fast food, junk food of the modern life. Hey, go back to fresh food, go back to real food, go back to clean food instead of contaminated with all these chemicals, and then you'll find the answer on how to deal with all those problems that modern life have brought upon ourselves. Same with that modern life has also brought to us a more sedentary way of life, right? Couch potatoes, TV and all that stuff. In the old days, in the days of grandmas and grandpas, people used to be more active, used to walk more, walk to the park, and used to be more, more active. And they used to have a better social life also, not individual life, but more community life, social life. So by looking into ourselves, we can find some answers on how to deal with many of the issues that we are facing today, right? Both physical as well as mental health type of issues, and as well as the issues that in general we face as a community. That notion, we promoted that notion in the early days of Radio Bilingüe, and we continue promoting that notion today. I think it continues being relevant, even more relevant in these days. Another one is the fact that some changes that I can attest in the life of Radio Bilingüe is in the early days, our service was more oriented, more focused because of the size of our operation to Mexicanos and Chicanos, no? Who used to be the large majority of the people, our audience, in the Central Valley. These days, we have transformed ourselves into a multicultural organization that has served through the years not just Mexicanos, Tejanos, Chicanos, a través de diferentes, not only segments of information, but also musical formats. But also we serve, Caribbean Latinos, Afro Latinos, ¿verdad? Puertorriqueños, Centroamericanos. We have served Tagalog-speaking audiences from Filipinas. We have served for years, actually, we used to serve Hmong-speaking audiences, from Southeast Asia, who, in those days, the capital in the U.S. of Hmong people was Fresno.
Yeah.
Now it is between Fresno and Minneapolis, I believe. It is Minnesota, Yeah. And but in these days, on Radio Bilingüe, you can also hear spoken on the air Mixtec language and Triqui language from the highlands of Oaxaca. No? Entonces, so we have grown to become a multicultural organization that, again, tries to build bridges with the different groups within our own community. Y también, we are in the effort of building bridges with our brothers and sisters south of the border. We are constantly in communication with our fellow journalists in public radio in Mexico. We have made the communication is growing with organizations such as Radio Educación or Instituto Mexicano de la Radio, which are the largest public radio networks on the Mexican side. So we're trying to bring closer, our audiences with the audiences south of the border in an effort to, again, fight against the prejudice, fight, in other words, the misconceptions that Mexicans have of the U.S., as well as the stereotypes and myths that in the U.S. you can hear about Mexico, right? This narco country or the border as a war zone, the border. When in fact, according to FBI figures, some of the safest cities in the U.S. are the ones along the border. So we're making an effort to bring together, to establish, build bridges, acercar a las dos comunidades to be able to fight misinformation. So those are again, some of the things that we're trying to pick up from our history of service.
Wow, that was really, really inspiring. Yeah, I think it is really important to kind of build that bridge and kind of defeat those stereotypes that you said that the U.S. does have in Mexico. As someone who lives right by the border, I feel very safe. And I've been to Mexico many times. I have family in Mexico. It's a beautiful country, and I think that this underlying sense of hate and division that we have is just, it's really not needed. And in this day and age, we need to be more united than ever. So I appreciate the work that you are doing. Thank you so much for this interview. Muchas gracias por esta entrevista. Y ya terminamos.
Bueno, gracias, encantado de la vida. Gracias.